platform later on. Right. So welcome to Professor James R. Doty. My name is Deepak. I am the host for this podcast channel. And welcome to viewers. Today we have a very special guest, Dr. James R. Doty. He is an adjunct professor in Department of Neurosurgery at Stanford University School of Medicine. And he is also the founder and director of Center for Compassion and Altruism Research and Education at Stanford University. Professor Doty, welcome to Business Talk. This is the first podcast episode we are executing with you. And thank you so much, sir.
I'm happy to be here, and I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Thank you, Professor Doty. Professor Doty, you have written a very excellent book called Mind Magic, and I think this is your second book. This is your second recent publication. So, can you please briefly introduce yourself and share what inspired you to write this Mind Magic?
So it really goes back quite a long time ago. As you know, my first book was called Into the Magic Shop, a neurosurgeon's quest to discover the mysteries of the brain and the secrets of the heart. And that was a memoir that included what we call contemplative practice or meditation combined with neuroscience. And the book discussed my childhood growing up.
Okay.
I grew up in poverty. My father was an alcoholic. My mother had had a stroke when I was a child, was partially paralyzed, and actually became quite depressed, attempted suicide. We were on public assistance really my entire childhood, and was evicted from different residences. Now, of course, growing up with that type of a background, as you can imagine, one, it's very chaotic, unpredictable. And some people would say it's a form of constant trauma. And for many children who grow up in that type of an environment, the likelihood of them overcoming the baggage that they carry with them is quite low. In fact, oftentimes children from those types of backgrounds become alcoholics or drug abusers or have mental illness. They're not able to integrate into society or to become quote unquote successes. What happened to me was, though, one day, and thus the title of the book, is I walked into a magic shop, and in the magic shop, there was a woman there. And I'm sure you have met people like this who have a radiant presence about them. And instead of looking down at me as a 12-year-old who was poor, obviously, and I had come in there because I had an interest in magic, but it turned out she was the owner's mother who was there while the owner actually was running an errand. But she had a conversation with me. She treated me as an equal. She didn't look down on me. I felt very comfortable. And she created what I would call a sense of psychological safety. I wasn't fearful. I wasn't afraid of telling her about myself. So I did. And after about 20 minutes of conversation, she said to me, I really like you. I'm here for another 6 weeks. And if you show up every day, I think I can teach you something that could really help you. And what she taught me really fundamentally changed the trajectory of my life. That included what we now would call a mindfulness practice or meditation practice or training your brain. And the reason that was helpful was because I did not realize at that time that I was always stressed and anxious, and my muscles were always tight because I actually had my sympathetic nervous system activated chronically because of all the trauma and unpredictability and chaos in my house, because I never knew what was going to happen, so I always had to be prepared. I always looked around. So she taught me a way to relax my body, which we would now call a body survey. She taught me how to focus, in this instance, looking at a candle. And you cannot learn unless you can be present and focus. And from there, she taught me that all the negative talk was not truth. And unfortunately, by the nature of the evolution of our species, we have a negativity bias because negativity puts our species at risk. If things are positive and there's no problems, you can relax, you can be present, you can be generous. But once you activate your sympathetic nervous system, you're constantly on alert. So once she taught me that negative dialogue was not truth, I was able to change the dialogue to one of positive self-affirmation.
Mm-hmm.
And once I was kind to myself, which is very hard for people in Western society, I could then look at the world through a different lens, and that was the lens of compassion. I recognized that everyone was suffering. I recognized my parents did not have the tools to help themselves. So I was much more thoughtful, much more kinder. And what I tell people is when I changed how I looked at the world changed how it looked at me or reacted to me. The other thing that she taught me was a visualization or manifestation technique. And once that book was published, which became a New York Times bestseller, it was a bestseller in 8 countries. It's translated into 36 languages. In fact, interestingly, the South Korean pop music band BTS actually used it as the basis for their 3rd album, in which there's a song called Magic Shop. But once that book was published, there was a lot of interest in this concept of visualization and manifestation, and people wanted more details. I'm sure you appreciate that using the term manifestation in the public lexicon is associated with a lot of woo-woo or pseudoscience, such as the law of attraction, this narrative that there is something out in the universe that judges whether the positivity that you put out into the universe is worthy of you receiving what it is you wish. And the problem, of course, with that is there is nothing out in the universe. And the reality is the power we have over what happens to us, much of it is within us. When you tell yourself, I'm not good enough, I'm not worthy, I don't deserve, I cannot, by definition, that immediately becomes truth. And people have these fixed beliefs based on what they think or what others have told them, which of course is aggravated by this negativity bias. But once you realize that those narratives are false, then this releases you from these limiting beliefs and makes you realize that your possibilities are in fact unlimited, and it's your choice. And it's a choice of learning how to use your mind to manifest what it is that is your intention. But there are certain caveats with that.
Very nice. So, Professor Doty, what scientific principles or theories support the concept of manifestation? If you can just enlighten on this topic.
Sure. So let me just first mention, as an example, a book called The Secret. Now, the book, The Secret, was quite popular, and it supported a common narrative that you should manifest that which helps yourself. And what I mean by that is it was a narrative very much tied into the Western definition of success, which is money, power, position. If you achieve success, that equates with happiness. And also in the West, there was a popular narrative for many years, in fact, decades, in which children were taught that everyone deserves a medal. If you run in a race and there are 10 people, it doesn't matter who wins the race, everybody gets a medal because everybody, quote unquote, tried. And the problem with this is this created, for many people, a sense of entitlement that they didn't really have to work particularly hard, yet they are entitled to be rewarded. Of course, the reality is that there are winners and losers. And if you don't work hard, if you're not able to compete, then you're going to not get what you want. And so we created an entire generation of people who think they should be rewarded with very little effort. So that is one problem. And this self-focused narrative is a result of what we have created in terms of the definition of success. And that is a belief that by achieving the external appearance of success, let's say living in a mansion, having money, being wealthy, driving an expensive car, buying an expensive watch, being able to display these things, this fills the emptiness that we all have inside of us. And of course, it does not. And this is the difference between what we call hedonic happiness or hedonism, seeking pleasure and avoiding pain, versus living a life of purpose and meaning, which is associated with actually not being focused on self, but being focused on the other. And when you focus on the other, this actually activates what we call your parasympathetic nervous system, or your rest and digest mode. And this is the mode actually in which we were designed to live. People who chase things to get external affirmation typically do it out of insecurity. And insecurity results in fear. Fear activates the sympathetic nervous system. Conversely, the parasympathetic nervous system actually results in the brain, or what we call cognitive brain networks, functioning at their best, and also your peripheral physiology functioning at its best. Because we evolved as a species to care. When our offspring are born, they don't run off into the jungle or the forest. They require us to care for them for at least a decade and a half. And if we don't care for them, they will die. They cannot live independently. So why would we put forth time, effort, resources to care for our offspring? And the reason is that when our offspring are in pain, when they're hungry, when they're suffering, it results in activation of parts of our brain that result in the release of different types of neurotransmitters, one of which, of course, that your audience is probably familiar with, is oxytocin, or the bonding, or the love hormone, or the affiliation hormone. Mm-hmm. And so we are genetically evolved to care. And when we care, we are rewarded. Our pleasure centers are activated. And the reality is, and numerous studies have shown, and whether this is the work of Bob Buettner with the blue zones, or the 85-year-long study at Harvard called the Adult Development Study, or what many call the Longevity and Happiness Study, is that when you care for others, when you're focused on others, when you have deep relationships, this actually activates all the parts of your body, brain and peripheral, to function at their best, and is associated with a significant increase in longevity. So in some ways, what we're talking about are two different narratives. One is a narrative based on fear, which seeks external affirmation for having things, hedonic happiness. This type of happiness is shallow and transitory, versus what we call eudaimonic happiness, which is looking through the lens of compassion, caring for others. And this is associated with meaning and purpose, and it is deep and it is long-lasting. And these are the contrasts. In terms of manifestation, you can manifest through the lens of fear, but oftentimes what you are seeking is not what you need, as is demonstrated many, many times over when we see people who have this need to display their wealth, but they're miserably unhappy. Versus you can see very humble people who care for others and they are ecstatically happy. So in terms of manifesting, you can use many of the techniques that are associated in the public lexicon in terms of manifesting, but you have to be in the right mental state.
Right.
And that's really a key here.
Mhm. Yeah. So, Dr. Doty, can you please share some practical techniques or exercise from your book that listeners can use to enhance the manifestation practices?
Well, sure. But let me first go into the neuroscience a little bit more,
Sure.
make people understand why this matters. Our sensory organs receive about 10 million bits of information every second.
Okay.
But most of this information is associated with what we call homeostasis, or maintaining body functions. Only about 50 to 100 bits of information a second are at a conscious level. And the reason this is important is that when you want to manifest an intention, it has to be embedded into your subconscious. And so you have the ability with this limited information to hijack it, to actually embed it into your subconscious using a technique we call value tagging. And what I mean by that is that once you've defined an intention, then you tag it as being salient or important to you. And when that happens, it first goes to this area of your brain called your default mode network, which is self-referential, is associated with mind wandering or daydreaming. But this is where you define who you are, what you want, how you see yourself. When you're able to embed that intention there, then this next activates what we call your task positive network. And what I mean by that is there's an area, a cognitive brain network, and these are not discrete areas, some of them even overlap. It activates your salience network, meaning that it identifies as something important to you. Once that occurs, then this activates your attention network, where you focus on it like a laser beam on what you want to accomplish. And what is often said is that the subconscious defines that intention for you, and your conscious, through the executive control network, actually is activated to make that happen. So I'm sure you have been at a party or something, and it's very noisy. Yet, in the din of all of that noise, if somebody says your name, you turn to it because your identity is deeply embedded into your subconscious. So you're always attuned to that. Because again, if you look at it from a survival mode, your subconscious always being looking around is very important. As another example, as a physician, I may tell a patient you have a particular type of illness, and frequently they'll say, I have never heard of that before. Yet I'll see them 6 weeks later and they'll sit there and say, the most amazing thing has happened. I've run into 5 people who have the exact same thing. And it's not because it wasn't there before, it's because they're attuned to it now. And in this case, it was embedded because of fear. But the point is, these things do get embedded. And again, you have to understand that if you look through the lens of compassion or being of service to others, oftentimes it actually changes what you think you want from sort of the self-interest perspective versus how you feel when you care for others or act in service of others. And this is why the Dalai Lama says, if you wish to be happy, be compassionate. Or if you wish others to be happy, be compassionate. If you wish to be happy, be compassionate. So it's really best to, one, learn how to regulate, and this is through a meditative or brain training practice, how to be in your parasympathetic nervous system, if you will, where you activate your vagus nerve, of which one part is the parasympathetic nervous system, so that you look through the lens of compassion in every action you do, understanding that when you look through that lens, one, your brain networks function at their best. It increases the possibility of you manifesting, and it makes you actually healthier, and it makes those around you happier. Getting back to your other question, though, which was, what are the different techniques in terms of manifesting? Now, you have to remember that there are no guarantees about manifesting. The point of the book isn't to say, if you follow this practice 100% of the time, you're going to get what you want. What it is actually saying is, if there is a possibility of it occurring, using these techniques increase the likelihood of that versus if you don't. So the first thing is, what many people don't appreciate is that all of us carry baggage from our childhoods. Now, many of us, I think, often say to ourselves, well, my situation was really bad. Their situation was perfect. The reality is most people carry baggage. Life is not perfect for most people. It is for some. But for most people, they carry baggage from their childhoods. And this, as an example, could be an abusive parent or someone who, during your developmental periods, abuse you, and then you confuse the love they have for you with abuse, and they get intertwined, and it creates dysfunctional relationships. And I'm sure you've heard of situations where somebody sits there and says, I don't understand this. It's like I keep making the same mistake over and over and over again. I don't understand it. Well, your baggage that you carry determines every action you make, every relationship you have, how you respond in different situations. So the first thing one has to do is to sit down and thoughtfully understand what they've already been manifesting, because all of us are manifesting all the time. But the problem for most of us is, it's like comparing an elite athlete with somebody who just woke up in the morning and isn't an athlete, right?
Right.
All of us, as an example, get up and walk around every day, but that's a far cry from being an elite marathon runner. So if you just wake up and are walking around, that's equivalent to just walking through your life in some ways blind. And what happens. You don't think about it. You just accept it. You don't have a deep reflection on it. You don't analyze why it's happened or how it's affected you. So the first thing is to understand what the baggage is you carry, what you have already been manifesting, so that you have insight and self-awareness, or what we call metacognition, being able to look at yourself and seeing what's going on. The other thing is, which we touched on a little bit, is understanding the difference between what you think you want and what you need. Again, unfortunately, in Western society, there is this overwhelming narrative that it's all about me, that focusing on money, power, and position will make you happy, which is ultimately all of our goals. And as a result, people get so distracted, and then they wonder why they're unhappy and they're miserable, even though many of the things they thought they wanted, they were able to manifest. So you have to understand the difference between what you think you want and what you need. Then the other thing is you have to obviously train yourself. And what I mean by that is, getting back to this analogy of an elite athlete, if you wanted to run a marathon, you don't wake up one morning and say, I'm going to run 26 miles and I'm going to do it really fast, because it doesn't work. We have to create habits of behavior. And the great thing about our mind is we can train our mind. And there are a number of books about, oftentimes it's called Tiny Habits, where we learn one thing and we embed that, and then we extend that. And so, as an example, if you wanted to run a marathon, you don't run 26 miles. You wake up in the morning, and maybe if you've never done that type of exercise, you simply walk around the block. Then the next day at the same time, you get up and you do it maybe a little further. And over time, your body adjusts and you're able to run that marathon. And the same is true in terms of embedding the habits that are necessary for you to maximize your ability to manifest. And of course, part of it is also, and this is associated with many of the techniques in common culture, which is one is utilizing all your sensory organs to define your intention, utilize those, repeat them over and over. And what I mean by that is, as an example, you think about it, you write it down, you read what you wrote silently, you read what you wrote aloud, you visualize yourself being in that position, and you do it over and over and over again. And I'm sure your listeners and you have probably heard the saying, what fires together, wires together. And this is how you lay down new neural pathways, how you strengthen neural pathways, because it is those neural pathways that are the determinant of new abilities or the ability to manifest your intention. The next thing you have to do is, again, understand how you limit your own beliefs, either because you have an external belief, or excuse me, where you have limited your beliefs and possibilities based on perhaps what others have told you or how you've grown up, and you limit yourself as a result of those beliefs, versus understanding the power that each of us has to change our beliefs and ultimately change our physiology and change our lives to have the life that we really deserve. And so one has to deal with that negative critic by diminishing its voice, by giving yourself positive affirmations, by recognizing that you have unlimited possibilities to manifest or change your life. And then the other important thing is, on the one hand, of course, it's important to have goals, but the other side of it is that one of the greatest causes of suffering is attachment and craving. So while one has goals and works very hard for those goals, or works very hard to manifest, these things are not in your power in regard to the time frame in which they occur, or whether they occur the way you wish, or whether one of the problems with this concept of the law of attraction, or how manifestation is presented, that there's some agent in the universe that looks at you and decides whether you're worthy based on what you projected out there. Of course, is false. And you have to understand that the power is within you. And if it doesn't happen, though, it's not as if you failed. Sometimes your subconscious actually knows more about what you need than you. And also, there are potentially other intervening events that limit whether what you're manifesting occurs at all. But you don't beat yourself up because it didn't happen. You have to understand you do the best you can. If you use those techniques, that dramatically increases the likelihood. But at the end of the day, there are no guarantees.
Right. Professor, what are some of common challenges people face when they're trying to manifest their goals and how they can overcome them? If you can have some thoughts on this.
Sure. Well, I think one of the challenges for many people is when you talk about mind training or meditation, people become fearful because they think you have to sit with your legs crossed like a monk and do this thing in a perfect position. And if you don't, you're not going to achieve that. And the problem is that that's not true at all. There are many types of ways in which you can activate your brain, and it doesn't have to be in a particular position. As you probably know, Thich Nhat Hanh, who actually is quite a famous meditator and a monk, he talked about walking in nature, walking meditation. And the thing is that whatever it is, whether you're lying down, whether you're walking in nature, whether you're actually sitting, the point isn't that this is some sort of a contest you have to win. The point is to simply be in a quiet space where you can direct your thoughts and activate those brain networks, which allow you to embed your intention. So the first thing is not to get lost in this idea that there's some sort of specific position or thing you have to do. There are certainly certain techniques. One is a breathing exercise, breathing in through your nose, releasing through your mouth. And what happens when you do these types of exercises is that it actually affects your vagus nerve, which contains the sympathetic nervous system, the flight, fight, or freeze mode, and the parasympathetic nervous system, or the rest and digest system. And that through a breathing exercise, you actually will activate the parasympathetic nervous system and get you away from being fixated or stuck in the sympathetic nervous system. And also, part of this has to do with emotion regulation. Again, and this relates to mind training. I'm sure you or your listeners have been driving and somebody has cut you off. Well, typically what we will do, or what I have done, is I may use a hand gesture or an expletive because I'm angry. I'm looking through the lens of me saying, they were selfish, they were thoughtless, they didn't care, they could have caused an accident. These are horrible people. And this is your natural reaction oftentimes when you're faced with something unexpected. You immediately react to it. And what happens is you shut down your executive control network, which is more thoughtful and discerning because you have access to prior experiences and memories, because you are now immediately reactive trying to survive. And that shuts things down. So you're focused on simply survival. But that activates all of these other aspects of your physiology. It increases your heart rate, your pupils dilate, your muscles tense up. And so what's interesting, though, is you have the ability to control that. If I change the narrative to the person who cut you off, his wife is sitting next to him. She's 8 months pregnant. Her water's broken. She's bleeding. He's trying to get her to the hospital. Well, now you're no longer angry at him, right? You're going, oh my God, I'm so sorry. I hope you make it. If I can help you get there, if I can escort you, if I can do anything, I'm happy to do so. Yet here we see in a microsecond, you have changed how you see the world. And this is something all of us have the ability to do. And this is something that Viktor Frankl there's a quote that's been attributed to him, although there's no evidence he actually said it. Regardless, this is the statement: between stimulus and response, there is a pause. And within that pause lies your freedom. And what that means is you actually are able to not immediately react, to pause and breathe for 3, 4, 5 seconds. And during that time, you recalibrate and you shift back into your parasympathetic nervous system, and you're able to make much more thoughtful, discerning decisions about your actions. And the interesting thing is, of course, when you do that, what purpose does it serve for you to get angry and use a hand gesture and scream an expletive at somebody? It does absolutely nothing other than to upset you. And in some ways, it's, as an example, it's like forgiveness. Being angry at something or someone for some perceived slight, or that they hurt you in some way, and you've associated that memory with an emotion, every time you think of it, it activates your physiology, and it serves no purpose. It's like drinking poison and somehow thinking it's going to affect the other person. It doesn't at all. So if you're able to maintain this calmness of spirit, look through the lens of compassion, every aspect of your life improves, and your goals, your desires, your intentions that not only are focused on others, but indirectly focused on yourself, actually results in you getting everything you want in most cases.
Nice. Professor, what role do emotions and emotional intelligence play in the process of manifestation?
Well, in some ways, we just talked about that, right? Emotion
Yeah.
regulation and how they can negatively affect your ability to manifest. You know, oftentimes, this idea of I want this, as I said earlier, is out of fear. And in some ways, it's to say, see, I'm okay. I have these things. Look at me. Tell me I'm great. And the problem, of course, is seeking external affirmation actually is an empty method, because there is no external affirmation that can make you okay with yourself. And this is why it is in your hands to determine whether you're happy. I'm sure you've met people who actually may have every external trapping of societal success. They live in a mansion, they're very prominent, they're very wealthy. Yet, and I've known many, many of these people, many of them are absolutely miserable. Conversely, you may know somebody who has a very humble job. As an example, there was a janitor when I went to high school. He was probably the happiest person I've ever met in my life. Because one of the problems is understanding what enough means and being satisfied with that. Again, that's another source of unhappiness, when you never feel you have enough. And unfortunately, this is a problem with wealthy, successful people. They get into this narrative that they need more and more because they're always comparing themselves to others. This janitor, he had a wife, he had 3 children, he loved them. They had a very humble home, but they were very satisfied with it. They drove a 15-year-old car, very satisfied with it. They had food to eat. They had friends, they had relatives, they interacted with them. They were joyful, they were appreciative. Yet, they probably lived close to the poverty line. And this is the sad, sad thing for many people, because they create their own unhappiness because they're constantly comparing them to others, and they always want more. I'm sure, and maybe you're not actually aware of this, but they did a survey among high school students, at least in the United States. And there were basically four professions, if you will, that they wished for. And it tells you, unfortunately, how sad our society is. They were being an influencer, being a millionaire, being a celebrity, or being a professional athlete. And imagine, nobody said, I want to be a doctor, or I mean, very few. Nobody said, I want a job where I help society. Nobody said that I want to create something that changes people's lives in a positive way. These were all self-serving narratives that they came to under the false belief that if they just were a professional athlete and made a lot of money, if they just had a lot of money, if people looked up to them, they would be happy. And as you know, many of these people who are influencers, they use filters to make themselves look better. And in fact, I mean, sometimes you compare what they started with and what they look like and go, oh my God, that's not even the same person. Or they create false narratives about their lifestyle. So everything they do on many levels is completely false. And these are unhappy people. And as we've seen over and over again, this results in stress, anxiety, depression, and oftentimes suicide because they know that they live a false life. And then the sad thing is the people who watch them, they buy into the narrative that these people are real and successful, which of course they can't compete with them. And then they're miserable and unhappy, and the same thing potentially happens to them. And of course, if you look at celebrity or professional athletes, this occurs to maybe 1 in a million, right?
Right.
And so the likelihood of you ever achieving that is essentially zero for most people. So what is it that these people are chasing? It's a very, very sad statement of our society at this point, when in fact, caring for others, alleviating the suffering of another, being present for somebody when they need you, that is a gift that not only affects you mentally, but it affects your physiology. It results in you living longer.
So, Professor Doty, let's talk about some future of manifestation research. According to you, what advancement in neuroscience research do you think will further, validate the understanding of the manifestation topic? And connecting to this question, is there any upcoming projects or areas of study related to manifestation that you are particularly, excited or you'd like to do it?
Well, I think based on my book, obviously I've looked at this fairly deeply in terms of the present science, and I'm not sure if there's much more in terms of adding to the theory that I already presented. Obviously, we will learn more about how these brain networks perhaps work better or more about them. But in terms of the fundamental principles that I've outlined in the book, I think it's pretty clear and straightforward. So I'm not doing any new cutting edge research on manifestation per se. There is an interesting topic, which I do have an interest in, which is the neuroscience of intuition, actually,
Okay.
which in some ways relates to this. But that's probably for my next book.
Sure. Would love to read it. So, Professor, what are the key messages or takeaways, would like to, give to the listeners to remember from your book? Any specific points you would like to highlight?
Well, I think one is to understand what you've already been manifesting. Two, to understand the difference between what you may think you want based on what society tells you versus what science has clearly shown, which is what you need, which is human connection, caring for others. Because not only does that make you feel better as a result of the release of neurotransmitters such as oxytocin, but it also makes your physiology work much better, and it stimulates your pleasure and reward centers. The other thing is to not be so attached to an outcome that prevents you from enjoying the journey that you're on to achieve that outcome. And what I'm saying is, I'm sure you've seen individuals who have sacrificed everything for a goal, and here you are standing on top of the mountain, and there's no one there. And the reality is, for most of us in our lives, the journey to that goal is oftentimes as important or more important than the actual goal itself. This is where you learn about yourself through your struggles, the down times. This is where you learn about resilience, what you're made up of, how strong you are, a realization about how important connecting with others are who help you along the way. And that's really the magic of many of these things, is understanding that we're not made to be alone. We're made to connect with others and to be of service to others, not to step over others on our way to quote unquote success.
Nice. Professor, is there anything you'd like to, share with our audience about your book or a power of manifestation?
Well, I hope the book is clear. Certainly, if you've not read my first book, I think reading the first book can give you insight into why the other book was written. Another thing that I'm passionate about, as you pointed out, I run the center at Stanford that does research on compassion, empathy, and altruism, of which actually the Dalai Lama is the founding benefactor. And I actually became the chairman of the Dalai Lama Foundation. But through the work that I've been doing, it's evident to me that a lack of compassion, a lack of connection, is very much responsible for the stress, anxiety, depression that's present in our society, especially among young people. As a result of that, I've been working for the last 3 years on a mental health app that uses emotion assessment combined with a proprietary conversational AI knowledge base of compassion-focused therapy and psychology, which is actually connected to a human-like avatar. So you can actually talk to the avatar. And the reality is, for most people in the modern world, when they feel stressed or anxious, it's about typically what they're going through at that moment. It's not people who have chronic deep depression. And the reason I say that is, for many people, if they have someone to talk to share their frustrations, their anxiety, in as little as 10 or 15 minutes, that can be dissipated. And some people say, oh my God, but AI separates you from people. Well, the reality is that, as an example, a study was done in the state of California among adolescents in terms of what they would like in a mental health app. And interestingly, the majority said they wanted to use a human-like avatar versus a person. And the reason is because of fear of judgment. So if you can use a human-like avatar combined with compassion and empathy, that can have a profound effect. And studies have shown, unlike typing on a chatbot, actually having a conversation with a human-like avatar results in you connecting with it like a human. You get an emotional connection, which is very powerful. And again, the goal is not to separate you from your friends or other people. The goal is to give you support during your period of feeling anxiousness or upset, to allow you to go back to your other life. And unlike, as an example, online therapy, that's expensive and it's not available after 5 o'clock on weekends. And most people don't really need that. The other thing is, you have things like Headspace or Calm, which are very popular apps, but their churn rate is massive. And out of 150 million downloads, only 2 to 4 million people use it at any one time, meaning it's not effective. And then, of course, you have chatbots, but you're typing off into space. So our studies have shown actually this app is very powerful. And for your listeners, we're actually allowing people to use it for free. And the app is called Happy, Happi, not Y, Happi. That means it has A and I in it, .ai. So happy.ai.
Yes.
And also, I just want to end by saying, every one of us, every day, has the ability to improve the life of another person. Sometimes it's simply saying hello. Sometimes it's giving a person a hug. Sometimes it's sharing a meal. And so don't ever forget that that type of interaction not only will change the other life, but it will also change your life.
Thank you very much, Professor Doty. It was a very nice, explanation, and the entire conversation was very interactive regarding your book. I would love to take few copies from the bookstore, and I would like to distribute to my friends and colleagues in the corporate. And by the way, I would like to inform you that I have started using your app happy.ai. Yeah, and I'm getting benefit from it.
Oh, well, thank you so much. I wish you the best. Let's stay in touch.
Sure, sir.
And we'll also do an interview when the new book comes out.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Doty. Thank you for joining us. Thank you.
You take care.
Thank you.
Much love to you.
Thank you, sir. Bye.